Today we're looking at some TV sitcoms nominated by you that just didn't land with audiences. We've all got our favourite shows, the ones we can watch over and over again for a good laugh, but there are some shows that didn't hit the comedic mark for some people. In this video we'll explore why you voted these 1970s and 1980s sitcoms the least funny. So grab a cuppa and get ready to find out what went wrong. Our earliest sitcom today starred Hilda Baker and Jimmy Jewell as constantly bickering middle-aged sister and brother Nellie and Eli Pledge. Nearest and Dearest ran from 1968 to 1973. The two disagreeable siblings were running their father's pickle business to earn their inheritance. The comic disputes were mostly based on the family business or domestic matters, with Nellie's constant nagging and Eli's constant drinking and womanising fueling their arguments. Other regular characters were the Pledge's second cousin, Lily Tattersall, played by Madge Hindle, and her constantly mute husband, Walter, played by Edward Mallin. Many viewers found negatives and positives in the show. It was accused of being badly acted, poorly directed with shaky sets and was cheaply made, but it was praised for having four great comedy characters in Nellie, Eli, Lily and Walter. One novel commendation was that, for the time, it had very little racist dialogue, although the reviewers said they couldn't think of a single non-white character in the show. A customer review on Amazon for the DVD box set said it was overacted to the hilt and you can see most of the gags coming a mile off. They said it was under-rehearsed, the actors forget their lines and Jimmy Jewell can't keep a straight face, but despite that they loved it. So how has this hilarious sitcom that was so popular in the 1970s ended up relegated to the backwaters of the least funny sitcoms? The show does rely on some classic sitcom tropes, like two characters with fundamentally opposing views being forced to live and work together, leading to constant conflict and predictable gags. The comedy was described as saucy, witlessly rude, or double entendre humour, but that was common in British comedy of the era. The humour can be seen as less sophisticated and some jokes may come across as crude or even offensive by modern standards. A significant part of the comedy came from Nellie's frequent malapropisms and catchphrases. While these were beloved at the time, they can feel repetitive and simplistic to a new generation of viewers. The show was a product of its time with a very theatrical style of performance and laugh track. While some viewers might enjoy this nostalgic feel, others find it stiff and artificial compared to the more naturalistic or cinematic styles of modern sitcoms. There was a notable lack of chemistry between the lead actors, even when their characters are bickering. It's well documented that Hilda Baker and Jimmy Jewell had a toxic relationship off screen. This animosity may make their interactions feel less like a playful rivalry and more like genuine dislike. This can make it difficult for viewers to connect with the characters or feel interested in their dynamic. As the series progressed, Hilda Baker, who was a key part of the show's appeal, reportedly struggled with her lines and became increasingly reliant on cue cards. This can disrupt the flow and believability of a scene, detracting from the comedic timing and the overall quality. Hilda Baker would later be diagnosed with dementia. The apparent forgetfulness might have been the undiagnosed onset of the condition. There was an American remake titled Thicker Than Water that featured respected actors Julie Harris and Richard Long. The adaptation seemingly didn't resonate with American audiences. One reviewer noted that nobody is very sympathetic here. It failed to capture a significant audience or critical acclaim, leading to its cancellation after just 9 episodes. Only When I Laugh was a hospital-based sitcom book from the patient's perspective, as writer Eric Chappell felt that previous shows in a hospital setting had just focused on the doctors, nurses and staff. there was some logic to having the nursing staff as the main focus, as they're generally constants and the patients are transient. The three patients have to have some comedy conflict, so they are from distinct social groups. There is working class Roy Figgis, middle class Norman Binns and the upper class Archie Glover. They are either fighting a cold war or arguing over who should have the bed nearest to the window. The only thing uniting them was their mutual nemesis, Dr. Gordon Thorpe and the orderly Gupta. So how is it that these patients can spend 29 episodes over 4 series in hospital? It helped that they're all hypochondriacs and spent more of their time misbehaving than they did actually being ill. It was popular at the time, otherwise Yorkshire Television wouldn't have made 4 series, but it wasn't another Rising Damp, although some critics didn't like that either. The restrictions of the hospital setting didn't seem to hit the comedy sweet spot for some viewers, which resulted in criticisms of the show being slow-paced and repetitive. From the online reviews, you could be mistaken for thinking that people had seen different shows, despite some reviewers praising the performances of what were undoubtedly some of TV's best sitcom actors. Some people just did not appreciate the acting. Historically, ITV did not have a good record for producing sitcoms, but Eric Chappell's previous offering, Rising Damp, was popular and considered one of the funniest shows ever. So for Yorkshire Television, entrusting him with another sitcom was clearly an obvious choice. However, some of the criticism could be described as institutional rather than specifically related to the sitcom, and related viewers' dislike for Only When I Laugh to ITV in general, slating Chappell's writing for being unoriginal, full of cliché comedy. It seems that the limitations of the hospital setting, confining a small cast of hypochondriacs, and the repetitive nature of the class-based conflicts just didn't satisfy many viewers who expected more dynamism in their comedies. Although Dream Stuffing only had 1 series, it did have 10 episodes, when most sitcoms only had 6 or 7. The series followed the lives of 2 young working class women, Mo and Jude, who share a flat in a council tower block in London's East End, along with their 3-legged cat, Tripod. Mo has a menial job whilst Jude is unemployed. It is among the less remembered 1980s sitcoms. Those who recall it generally express critical indifference, and the specific factors contributing to its failure are often undefined. It was not a simple lack of humour, but a profound creative miscalculation, a series caught awkwardly in the transitional period of 1980s British comedy. The early 1980s marked a pivotal moment for British television comedy. On one side were the established or traditional sitcoms. These shows were often characterised as being safe and reactionary, relying on familiar formulas and settings. Examples include the long-running series Terry and June. Opposite this traditional camp was the emerging alternative comedy movement. Shows influenced by this movement were often described as anarchic and surreal, injecting a new punk energy into prime time. Among the most notable successes from this wave were The Young Ones, which aired from 1982 to 1984. A sitcom was expected to either be a well-executed traditional format or a groundbreaking, convention-breaking new form. Dream Stuffing was a production in the midst of this turbulent and transformative period. Its failure seems to be a direct result of its inability to navigate this cultural and creative conflict successfully. It was probably not quite as bad as some critics would have you believe. However, it was typical of Channel 4's output of the time. There was an entertaining setup in the 3rd episode when the girls go to the council to report their heating isn't working. The receptionist tells them to use the phone to call for an appointment. When the call is answered, it's the same receptionist who has moved to the next desk. She says they're understaffed, so she has to pretend to be 2 people to maintain the standard of service, presumably bad service. The principal evidence explaining the show's failure comes from a critical review in the Guardian newspaper, which dismissed Dream Stuffing as heroically bad. In his review, Martin Walker criticises the series as a painful attempt to construct an up-to-date and relevant sitcom. However, the most damning criticism is the claim that the series felt close to a parody of Channel 4's right-on output of the time. This explains why the show failed to resonate with audiences and critics. Instead of possessing the authentic anarchic spirit of the alternative comedy movement, the show's approach felt forced and manufactured. Dream Stuffing was a short-lived series, receiving only a single repeat broadcast on Channel 4 in 1985. However, in fairness, I should clarify that Channel 4's output at the time was entirely provided by external production companies. The channel didn't own the programmes and only had contractual rights for a limited number of broadcasts. Limehouse Pictures Limited could have sold the rights to other broadcasters if they wished. Some of the episodes are available as off-air recordings on YouTube, and a single example is held on broadcast quality tape at the BFI, but the existence of most of the series master tapes is unknown. Dream Stuffing tried to capture the spirit of the emerging genre. The show's attempt to be up-to-date and relevant ultimately came across as inauthentic, a fatal flaw that its more successful contemporaries avoided. As one retrospective commentary notes, it's a show that simply falls through the cracks. This lack of legacy is a direct consequence of its poor reception, not a random occurrence. In the end, Dream Stuffing serves as a valuable case study of an ill-fated experiment ultimately becoming a victim of its own creative miscalculation. Ever-decreasing circles embodied some of the typical tropes of traditional TV sitcoms. A middle-class husband and wife, Martin and Anne Bryce. He has a middle management job, she is the dutiful wife keeping the home, and they have wholesome friends and neighbours. However, this is where all similarity with the other cosy 1980s sitcoms ends, and might signal why so many people found a lack of relatable humour in the show. Richard Bryars plays Martin Bryce, the obsessive middle-aged man and all-round interfering know-it-all. His mission in life seems to be to organise everything and everyone around him down to the last nitpicking detail, which involves setting up committees, drawing up rotas and chairing endless meetings. His long-suffering and mostly sympathetic wife often misses out on any quality time with her husband while he fusses about minor details that could wait until another day. However, a new next-door neighbour arrives, the very handsome and successful businessman Paul Ryman. He manages to upstage and irritate Martin with his effortless charm and relaxed attitude. Anne's eyes light up when Paul enters a room, but there's never anything more than casual flirting between them, not that Martin ever noticed. In the Radio Times Guide to TV Comedy, Mark Lewison gives an unflattering account of Martin and suggests that Anne should have left him for Paul. It was overall well written. No one complained that the scenarios were any less believable than any other typical 1980s sitcom. Going away for a weekend, refereeing the boys' football club, having a fundraising dance, all fairly normal activities, all organised by Martin with his usual fastidious eye for detail and insistence on order and organisation. This is where the difference from other sitcoms makes the show less watchable. Martin is not the lovable, bumbling hero seen in many other sitcoms. His humour comes from his social ineptitude, his rigid adherence to his own moral code, and his constant struggle to maintain control over his meticulously organised world. For some viewers, this kind of character isn't a source of laughs, but rather a source of irritation or even discomfort. The comedy arises from the characters' personalities and their interactions, rather than from a series of escalating absurd situations. The show's writers, John Esmond and Bob Larby, were known for creating realistic, flawed characters whose dialogue and behaviour were inherently funny. If a viewer isn't invested in the central conflict between Martin's insecurities and his rival Paul's effortless charm, or the long-suffering Anne's quiet frustration, the humour may fall flat. Many viewers knew Richard Bryars from his previous much more broadly comic role as Tom Good in The Good Life. Tom was an aspirational counterculture figure. Martin Bryce, on the other hand, was an anxious and fussy conservative. The contrast would have been jarring for fans who were expecting a similar comedic style. Bryce himself saw Martin as a mild David Brent, a character who is so precisely funny because he is awkward and socially out of sync. In essence, Ever Decreasing Circles is a sitcom that has been described as funny and sad in equal measure. It requires the audience to be able to find humour in a character's flaws and despair, which isn't always a recipe for universal appeal. However, it did all end up happily ever after. In 1989, after the 4-series run, there was a feature-length Christmas special. Martin's company is moving its headquarters to Oswestry and he has been promoted. So the Bryces are in the process of moving house. Martin realises he cannot organise all the clubs and societies, which he's going to have to give up anyway. So Paul becomes the obvious choice to organise the annual fair. Then Anne announces she's pregnant. Martin is, eventually, delighted. Whether it's the lack of relatable characters in Dream Stuffing, the repetitive jokes of Nearest and Dearest, the slow-paced Only When I Laugh, or the dark humour of Ever Decreasing Circles, these shows serve as a fascinating case study in the art of comedy. They remind us that creating a successful sitcom isn't just about a good premise, but also about making a genuine connection with the audience. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which other sitcoms you found unfunny. You might see them here soon.